Well, welcome to week 2 of B.L.E.S.S, the series. My name's Ed Martin, and I'm so glad that you are here to be a part of it. Last week when we started this series, I said that one of the things that we want to be as a church is we want to be a blessing to our community, that we just don't want to be a place where we invite people to come in, but we want to be a blessing to people even if they never come. And one of the things that has always driven us over the last decade or more is this question that we began to ask ourselves to make sure that that was true is, would anybody who didn't come to Community Christian, would they even care if our church went away? Like, would anybody around us who they've never come here, they don't participate in our church, would it matter to them if the whole Community Christian thing just stopped altogether? And when we began to ask that question, we said, well, I don't know if that's true or not. And so it really began to drive us to do more, to be a blessing to people in our community who might never come, who might never follow Jesus, but because they were our neighbors, that we wanted to be a blessing to them. And I'm so proud of who you've become, of what you've done. And that's not me, it's not our staff, it really is you. And even today, in this Top to Toe program, as you're bringing stuff back today, you're doing that again. And I'm thankful we can ask you to do that, and you go above and beyond what anybody can imagine that you would do. That even if we ask you to go volunteer at events that we don't run, but that people in our community are running, you show up and you volunteer and help them. And with that in mind, let me just say one more thing on that. If you work with other organizations and you need volunteers occasionally, we would love to serve you. We as a church, we would love to help you with volunteers for that. Now, you can't contact us on Tuesday night and say you need 40 people on Wednesday morning, but if you give us a couple of weeks, a few weeks, we can probably get some people together to help with your event. You contact us, reach out to us and tell us what you need, and we'll see if we can't help. We'd love to do that. But that is not what this series is about. This series is about you and me. It's about us living out the personal mission that we have, where we work, where we play, where we live. We're asking more the question in this series, would anybody where you live even care if you didn't live there anymore? Where you work, have you been a blessing to people in your community at work that it would matter to them if you weren't there, that you've enriched their lives that kind of way, where you play on the teams your kids are a part of? Have you been a blessing in those environments? Because after all, we know that the one thing Jesus asked us to do was not just to love God, but to love our neighbor like we love ourselves. And so at the heart of this Blessed series is that idea. What if all of us just got better at this one thing Jesus asked us to do, loving our neighbor? And with that in mind, last week we started with this acronym of B.L.E.S.S. And it really comes down to 5 kind of practices that we can do, and we can get real serious about doing this one thing of loving our neighbor if we will just begin to put these 5 practices into place. And that word bless, even though it is an acronym, it really is well chosen in that it's not just some generic kind of religious sounding word like bless you or that kind of thing. It really goes back to the original call God had for his people when he said, I'll bless you and you will be a blessing. That God's call to his people has always been, I will bless you and then you will be the dispensers of that blessing to the rest of the world. I'll bless you and you go out and you bless everyone around us. So in this series, we've been taking this word bless, and it's an acronym that each stands for a different way for you to begin to think about how you can literally bless the people that you live around, that you work around, that you play around, the people that you're around, the places where you shop and live, what you can do. So last week we said that it begins with B, which is begin with prayer and asking God, as I begin every day, God, how do you want me to bless my world for you? God, the people you bring to me today, how can you use me to bless my world? And then L stands for listen. I listen to the people and places that I'm in. I listen to hear what God's already up to. I don't just assume that I already know what everybody needs. I begin with prayer that God will use me to bless them, and then I listen so that I can pray about the things that I've heard, that God would bless those areas, or he might even use me to be a blessing in those areas. Now today, I want to give you the next 2, E and S, and then we're going to end this all up by focusing on the last S next week. That'll be the end of this series. And before I tell you what these two are, if you don't already know, begin with prayer and listening are really important for you to understand. Those two really do need to go in that order, and they really are first. That you should begin with prayer to ask God to be with you and to open your eyes to what He's doing, and then you should begin to listen. But these next two that I give to you, they really aren't that way. It could be that you could put S before E, but that's not really a word, so we couldn't do it that way. Or it could be you could do E without S, and you could do S without E. What I want you to understand is they don't have to come in this exact order, and you don't necessarily in every situation have to do both. These are both practices that are offered to you, and they together or they individually form the next steps in this blessing kind of strategy. But they're really, as you begin with prayer and you listen, these are really the tools that you would use in the next step before you get to the last S that we'll talk about next week. And so today's message is brought to you by the letters E and S, and E stands for eat, and S stands for serve. Now, everything we do, as we've been saying in this series, we're trying to learn from our leader Jesus and to see how he did these things that we're talking about in his life. And if I were to ask you, what do you think about as one of the primary things Jesus did while he walked on the earth? You'd probably think about his teaching. You'd think about maybe he healed people. You'd think about him choosing the leaders that were around him. But you probably wouldn't think about Jesus eating. But if you ever spend any time reading the biographies of Jesus that we have in the Bible, you might be surprised how many of the significant stories that we have about Jesus take place around meals. I mean, some of the most significant moments that we know about in the life of Jesus take place while he's eating with other people. And the reason for that is, well, it's really important missionally, but it was such a central part of their lives. And again, that's not one of those duh things, well, everybody's got to eat. It really was a part of their culture. It was deeply ingrained how important eating was. Now, if you're somebody like me and you eat very fast, and I know other people say they eat very fast, I eat faster than almost anybody I know. Even when I eat with people who say to me, hey, I eat fast, I'm always thinking, you're not going to eat faster than me. And in our world, the pace of our lives, all of us find ourselves just gobbling down food, and we eat really fast, and we eat on the go, and we're not just sitting in place by meals. But in their culture, it really wasn't that way. There was a deep significance to the meal you eat and who you ate with. And I think you can get it this way. There's something that's signified when you intentionally invite somebody to do a meal with you, or you're invited by somebody to have a meal with them. When there's an intentional process, it is saying something about you and the other person. In their day, this was such a cultural thing of being a part of hospitality or showing hospitality to someone or inviting somebody participating in meals. It showed your approval of them. It showed that you took part in them, that you were okay being identified with them. And religious leaders in their day, they wouldn't eat just with anybody. They didn't want people to think that somehow they had brought God's name down by eating with the wrong people. But Jesus was very intentional. When you read about Jesus eating, Jesus, of course, ate with important people and religious leaders, but Jesus would also eat with the outcast. Jesus would spend time with people that no one else would eat with, or he'd go to parties at the houses of people that everybody else thought were big sinners. And a part of that was a part of his mission. He was indicating to those people too, hey, you matter to me. Hey, you're a part of what belongs to you. I want to be identified with you. So as for us, that in blessing our world, there's a significance even in our world when you decide in your neighborhood with people that you work with, the people you play with, this E stands for, at some point, you have to move beyond the small talk and just praying for people and listening to what's going on. And you begin to intentionally identify with them. And you move to where occasionally you might have a meal with people. I want to read to you one of my favorite quotes of all time. It's written by a guy named Alan Hirsch. It's in a book called Here and Now, Right Here, Right Now. And Alan Hirsch is one of these guys that he thinks about how to help all of us Christians do what God's asked us to do better. And that's what this this book is about. Here's what he says. Sharing meals together on a regular basis is one of the most sacred practices we engage in. Intentional hospitality is a tremendous opportunity to extend God's kingdom. If every Christian household regularly invited a neighbor or a coworker or someone from a ball team into their home for a meal once a week, we could literally change the world by eating. Change the world by eating. Now, that was a sentence that was made for some of us. Now, you might be thinking, hey, that's a little overblown. I mean, change the world by eating? I don't think so. But here's what I want to say to you. What if every follower of Christ at Community Christian would decide, maybe you don't want to decide once a week. You think, oh, from 0 to once a week, that's too much. But what if you decided once a month? Or even if you can't do once a month, what if you decided, hey, this year, 4 times this year, once every 3 months, I'm going to make a plan, and I'm going to invite someone that I'm praying for, that God's put in my world, somebody around me that I'm trying to figure out how I can be a blessing in their life. And my neighbors, my coworkers, the people I'm around, I'm going to invite them to share a meal with me. Who knows what God might do in that? Who knows what you might hear? Who knows what conversations might start? See, God designed us in such a way that eating with somebody, it's not just a physical necessity that we eat. It's a social, interrelational interaction kind of thing. And eating, it's a great way to bless the world that God's put you in. Now, you might be thinking, well, that sounds really good, but it really doesn't fit my life very well. And I'll just say to you, when it comes to these kind of things, these kind of little step more kind of that are beyond, hey, I'm going to pray for somebody, I'm going to listen. When it goes to these steps, all of us have our butts. But I wouldn't know what to say. But I don't really cook. But I don't have the time to fix the kind of meals that you'd invite a guest over for. But I don't have time to clean my house up so it's fit to have guests into my house. I don't know how to fix anything fancy enough for guests. So here's what I want to say to you. You don't like to have people in your house? So go out. You don't know how to cook something nice enough? So order something in. You don't have time to clean everything up or fix a fancy meal? Have your husband do it. Or just go out to eat. What I'm saying to you is, I know there are all kinds of reasons that immediately spring to our minds of why I can't do this, but I'm encouraging you, if we really want to get better at doing the one thing Jesus asked us to do, to love the people that are around us, to love our neighbors, we're going to have to do something about the excuses that get in the way that keep us from doing what He's asking us to do. And we're going to all have to get out of our comfort zones a little bit that have trapped us into where we're not really loving our neighbors, so that we can bless the people that are around us. Now, the S that I want to talk to you about stands for serve. You know, when you serve other people, it can bring out, honestly, all kinds of motives. You can serve people and completely have the wrong kind of motives. So I'm not proud of this story that I'm going to tell you, but it's a true story, and it's my story, and so I have every right to tell it. It doesn't paint me in the best of light, but it's true, and it'll help you see this point. When I first became a Christian, and I told you a little bit last week about it, I sort of became a Christian kicking and screaming. I wanted to do what I wanted to do, how I wanted to do it, when I wanted to do it, and through a really pretty, for me, a very dramatic conversion, I became a follower of Jesus, and then just a couple of weeks after I became a follower of Jesus, I left the college I was in, and I went to a Bible college. Now, one of the hesitancies I had about going to a Bible college, and this will just show you how incredibly shallow I was at that particular point and where my mind was, one of the problems I was having about moving from being not a Christian to being a Christian was I assumed that all the women who went to Bible colleges wouldn't be very attractive. I just thought, that's going to be the hardest part for me is I just hadn't met many Christian women that I thought of as very attractive that I wanted to have much to do with. So there you see where my mind was. So I remember on the very first day I was at orientation for this particular Bible college, and I'm sitting in a big room with all the other incoming freshmen, and the guys up front talking, and I'm looking around the room, and I haven't really seen anything as I look around the freshman class that has alleviated this concern for me about, the females there. And I'm sitting there, and then all of a sudden, there she was on the stage, and she was gorgeous. I mean, just unbelievably attractive. And the guy who was up talking, he introduced her and said that she had something she wanted to talk to us about, and I was like rapt attention. She came up and she said her name, and she said that she had a friend who was also an incoming freshman, and that she needed some of us guys who were going to be living in the dorm with him to help her with him. Now, I hadn't even noticed up until that point that she had come on the stage pushing a guy in a wheelchair. I was looking at other things. I had not noticed the guy in the wheelchair. So she said, I want to introduce you to Jerry, and that was the guy in the wheelchair. And she said, Jerry's going to be an incoming freshman, and he needs a little help around the dorm, and if you would be willing to help him, I'd love to talk to you, and if you could just meet me down front as soon as this is over, I'll talk to you about that, and you can become a part of that team. Well, I couldn't get down front fast enough, man. They couldn't end that meeting fast enough. So I went down there, and honestly, there were only like 2 other guys. I'm thinking, what's wrong with everybody else? Why isn't everybody down here? But anyway, there's just a couple of us standing down there, and she introduces herself, and she was just as nice as I assumed that she was. And then she introduced us to Jerry, and he was a great guy. He was as nice as, he could be. And she explained to us that what Jerry needed was, because he was in a wheelchair and he had been for some time, he needed some help with guys that would help him around the dorm with stuff. And she explained to us that he'd need help getting to class and all that kind of stuff. Well, I agreed to be a part of that, and that I would be a part of that, assuming that if I was a part of helping him, I'd get to hang out with her a little bit, and who knows what might happen. And so I agreed to do that. Now, what she hadn't told us in that thing was a part of helping him was we'd have to help him get dressed every day, and then we'd push him to class, and that really wasn't that big a deal. We could help him get dressed and get to class, and I did all of that. But the other thing that nobody ever told me is that we were going to have to help him with bathroom stuff as well. Now, here's another part about me that most of you are going to hate. Don't write me about it. I know it's not a good thing. I couldn't even change my own kids' diapers very well. Like, if I was in charge at home and Becky had to go somewhere and I was left with one of the kids and they had, something bad happen in their diaper, if the kid was okay with what was in their diaper, I was okay with what was in their diaper. We'd just wait until Mom got home, and we'd give her a little gift when she walked in the door. Because for me to change a diaper, man, I was gagging the whole time, and even 3 kids, I never got past that. I just couldn't handle it. So here I am with this full-grown man in a dormitory. I'm trying to help him with bathroom stuff, and he's doing his thing, and I'm vomiting. Well, the other thing that became real clear to me is, one, I wasn't equipped to serve that way, and 2, I found out real quick, she didn't even go to our school. I wasn't going to get to know her at all, so my mixed motives didn't really lead me where I wanted to go. So believe me, I know that when it comes to serving people, you can have all kinds of reasons that you do it. What I want to say to you as we start this whole thing about serving is we aren't serving people so that we can indebt them. That's one of the reasons people serve. I want to make them feel like they owe me something, or I'm serving to pay back a debt, or I serve to do my part in the community. I want them to know that I'm that kind of person, that I serve. We don't do any of that. We don't even serve people in this way as we're trying to bless them. We're not serving anybody so they will become Christians. We serve them because we are Christians. We are serving because we follow Jesus, and the one we follow said about himself, I did not come to be served, but to serve. That's who he was, and that's who we follow. And I think the best way for us to get at this and understand what Jesus is asking us to do in serving is to look at the way he served. So I want to give you an example, and this is one of the many I could give you, but this is written by a guy named Mark in one of the biographies of Jesus. Here's the way he describes this event.
Then Jesus left the vicinity of Tyre and went into Sidon, down to the Sea of Galilee, into the region of Decapolis. There some people brought to him a man who was deaf and who could hardly talk, and they begged Jesus to place his hand on him. After he took him aside, away from the crowd, Jesus put his fingers into the man's ears. Then he spit, touched the man's tongue. He looked up to heaven, and with a deep sigh said to him, Epaphra, which means be opened. At this the man's ears were opened. Now, you can see in this account that in all really the accounts of Jesus, and this may sound to you like a little, again, of course, Jesus served people who were in his immediate proximity. This is a man who couldn't hear, he couldn't talk very well, but he's really near Jesus, and Jesus served the people who were close to him. Now, the reason I bring that up, because it sounds again like something you should just, well, of course. But here's what I've noticed about a lot of Christ followers. I've met a lot of people that are more than willing to serve people on the other side of town, the other side of our county, the other side of our country, the other side of our world. But they want to do something that feels like it's big, like it's important. It's almost like if I can't have a picture that I can post on the gram, or I can't have a place that I can post something, a long post to talk about what I'm doing, it's not really worth doing. But the thing Jesus called us to do was to love our neighbor. And when I say that to people about, hey, it's not just about serving people over there, it's about serving the people that are right around you, it's almost like I could see in their eyes, it's like, well, you know, nobody ever felt a great purpose my great purpose can't be just to love my neighbor. But that's what Jesus said. That's where you start. You start with the people that are near you. You start with the people who are in front of you. You start people who are in your proximity, where you work, where you play, the people that are around on your kids' ball team, where you hang out in your neighborhood. Those are the people that God is calling you to serve. See, I think we overlook the fact that God has placed you in a place for a reason, that you're here for a reason. And you're thinking, no, I got transferred here by my company. Or you're thinking, no, I actually followed him here. Or no, I didn't even want to come to Coweta, but that's where she lived. Or, hey, I just moved here because it's cheaper than the north side. The traffic's not as bad. No, I don't think that's the case. You might not have ever read this, but in the Bible, in a book called Acts, there's this statement. God made from one blood all nations who live on the earth. He set the times and the places where they should live. You may not have realized this, but God put you in that group. God put you at that workplace. God put you in that neighborhood. God certainly wants to use you to serve the people in your immediate proximity. That's where we begin. The next thing I want you to notice about how Jesus served is that he was very perceptive with the people he was serving. Mark tells us Jesus took this guy aside. Jesus took him away from the crowd. Now, I'll just say to you, generally when somebody has called me aside, that hasn't always been a good thing for me. I remember my dad saying, hey, Ed, come here with me. Rarely was that a good thing. Sometimes I've been in a group and I've been telling a story and I look across the room and my wife is doing this. That's normally not a good thing either. But in this case, Jesus, he sees this guy and he takes him aside. Now, Jesus regularly healed people publicly. Why has he called this guy aside? Well, I think when you read that the guy, he was deaf and he couldn't speak very well, I bet this is a person that knew what it felt like to be made fun of by people. And I think Jesus doesn't want to point out publicly what's going on with this guy. So he took him aside, away from the crowd, and he refuses to make a point out of this guy's condition. He wants to be with him. He's very perceptive about what could be going on below the surface. Stephen Covey, in one of the best books that I ever read, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he tells a story in that book about how one day he was on the subway and this father got on the subway and he had his 2 kids with him and the boys were just incredibly rowdy. And Covey says, I normally wouldn't even notice that kind of thing, but the kids were loud and they were obnoxious and they were bothering people, bumping into people. And finally, eventually, after a number of stops, he went over to the guy and he sat down next to the father and he said, hey man, I don't normally do this, but you got to get control of your kids. You got to say something to them. And the dad said, yeah, I know. I don't know what to say. We just left the hospital where their mother died. The people of God have been put in proximity with people, and you should never think that you know the whole story even though you've been listening. You should always serve people with a great deal of perceptivity that maybe there's more going on than you see. Try to listen really carefully and serve perceptibly. Now, the last one I want to talk to you about, you just experienced. You know how in that story, that Covey story, the moment when you realized that the mother had died, something inside of you went, oh. Well, that's what happens with Jesus in this story. Listen to the descriptive language again. He looked up to heaven and with a deep sigh said to him, Ephphatha. In the original language, the word that they use there for sigh, it's not really what we think of as a sigh. It's this deep inward groan. It's the kind of thing that happens when somebody tells you something about somebody you know that something really bad happened and you go, oh, no. Jesus is feeling for this guy. He's moved from just seeing it. He's empathetic with the guy. It's become very personal for Jesus. See, Jesus isn't just some serving machine out handing out miracles and helping people around him. Jesus moved into the condition with people. It became personal. And if we're going to serve people well in a way that's a blessing to them, it'll become personal for us too. One final thing to mention on these two that I want to mention to you, that when you're out and you're in these two stages and you're eating with people and you're serving with people, when we're willing to bless people, I don't want you to overlook the last part of this story. Often God's power gets released when we bless people. You won't forget the big event of this is that the guy gets healed. Jesus accessed God's power in such a way that everybody wanted to talk about it. And as we bless people, we should access His power too. Here's what I think about you. A whole bunch of you here, because I know you and I've watched what you do when we talk about something like this. Not all of you, but a lot of you, you're going to try this. In fact, you've already been praying for people and you've been trying to listen, and now we're going to talk about this, and you're going to try this. And you're going to think, when you think about eating with or serving people, particularly when you think about serving people, you're going to think about doing something nice for them or helping them out with some need. But you're going to overlook the fact that you have something available to you as a follower of Christ that they might really need, but we often don't access it. You're going to be with people and you're going to hear that they're sick, and you should pray that God would heal them. He just might. You're going to be with people and you're going to hear they have a relational difficulty, that maybe their marriage is getting bad, and one of the best things you could do to serve them is pray for God's power to release and their marriage to be restored. You're going to meet people and you're going to find out as you listen, you're going to be perceptive enough to realize, oh, that person's addicted. You need to pray that God would set them free, that He would put them in a place that they could get free. I don't know what God's going to do, but I know this. When God's people go out to bless, God often releases His power in ways we would not think. I heard a story from a few years ago of a church in, I don't know how to say this name of this town really well, Stavanger, Norway. It was a state-run Lutheran Pentecostal church. Now, if you understand anything about denominations, that statement has a bunch of contradictions in it. They all contradict. But they had this thing in their country where it's not even as Christian as our country, where they would go to the middle of their town every weekend, and they would set up a tent, and they just put up a sign that say healing prayer outside the tent. And that's all that would happen in there. They just put up a sign, nothing strange, nothing weird was going to happen. They would just invite people to come in, and they would pray for healing for whatever would happen. Well, the pastor of that was telling about that, and he said, I don't know why, but we pray for healing in our church all the time, and honestly, when we pray for healing in our church, maybe about 10% of the people ever experience healing. But when we pray for healing out in public in that tent, the healing results are about 80%. Wow. I don't even know what to do with that. I don't know what to think about that story. But I know this. When you move outside your comfort zone, when you step out and you want to bless the people that God has put you around, I know that God often releases His power in ways that we would not expect. In fact, Jesus, He had a verse, there's a verse that you may have never known where you think, well, I can't do what Jesus did, but He said this to His followers just before He left. He said, I leave in greater things than I have done, you will do. I go away, but the things you've seen me do, you will do greater things than this. If we move out, we access the power of God, God will do amazing more than you think. Okay, I want to end by talking to you about a few next steps. First, with regard to this proximity thing, I want to encourage you to take the challenge if you haven't already. Last week we printed it on the back of your program, this Dozens Challenge. And we've created this tool, community-christian.net/bless. There's a website that talks through these steps with you, and on one of those we've uploaded that little chart that talks about your neighborhood, the people around you, and it challenges you to figure out the people that are around you. 3 people on one side, 3 people on the other, the 6 people across the street. What are their names? Have you begun to pray for them? Have you begun to listen to them? Have you begun to think about that? Would you take that challenge as a next step? Now, if you don't live in a neighborhood like that, maybe you think about the dozen people that work around you, or you don't have that many people work around you. You think about the people that are around you. What are their names? What are you hearing? What are the needs they have? How could God use you to bless in that area? For others of you, while I've been talking about this thing today, a name came to your mind. Somebody that God brought to your mind that you should invite for a meal or you could serve. Here's my challenge to you. Would you take action on that name in the next 24 hours? Not this week, not sometime soon. Would you take action on the name God put on your mind? Would you take action on it in the next 24 hours? If a person came to your mind, would you think about how you can bless them in the next day? Remember, we're the people of God. We have access to the power of God. And we have been blessed and we've been asked to be a blessing and to get better at the one thing Jesus said mattered, to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. Let's go out and let's bless the people in our world. Let's bow together and I'll pray. Father in heaven, thank you for the opportunity to know you and for the blessing that you have been in my life and the blessing of most of us, all of us. You've blessed us that are listening in. Would you help us now to go and be dispenser of your blessing to the people you've placed around us? In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.